Well, I think we can get started. Welcome everyone to our Food Safety for Farmers webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about on-farm readiness reviews. We really appreciate everyone who registered for this live webinar and who are taking the time to join us. We're going to be talking about some very important things that many of you who are farmers perhaps can use as it pertains to food safety and the on-farm readiness reviews. So with that, we're going to get started. And I would like to first thank our speakers, Scott McClure, Environmental Manager in the Division of Fruit and Vegetables at the Florida Department of Agricultural Services, and Trevor Gilbert, who is a food safety expert and works for the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, and the Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition. My name is Juan Carlos Rodriguez, and I am an education and outreach specialist with Florida Organic Growers. So we thank our speakers and everyone who is joining our webinar today. Before we get started and allow questions, you can contact the FDA's website and find more about, what are the legal advice that you may need. So, as I was saying, we are going to be discussing the on-farm readiness reviews and also provide a review of our podcasts, episodes 7 and 8 that are available for all of you to listen to and hopefully get to some questions that we have received as part of this webinar, but also at the end allow for those of you that have questions to ask questions to our panelists. And with that, I would like to provide just a minute or two for Scott and Trevor to introduce themselves before we get on to our agenda.
Since Trevor hasn't jumped right on, I'll just jump right in.
That's great. Thank you, Scott.
I'm Scott McClure. I'm the FSMA coordinator for the Division of Fruit and Vegetables for the state of Florida. So I manage the in all aspects regarding the produce safety rule, part 112. Our division, I manage that through our division, the Division of Fruit and Vegetables. I've been with the division of over 33 years, and I have other functions that I perform, but my primary function is the FSMA manager. So I manage the whole FSMA team, from on-farm readiness reviews to inspections and education and outreach and anything dealing with the produce safety.
Perfect. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you. Scott is always said to put the best foot forward, so I have to let you go first, right? So, hi everyone, and again, my name is Trevor Gilbert. Thank you for this opportunity once again, FOG, to partner with you on behalf of the FDA. Just briefly on my background, formerly, with the USDA Specialty Crops Inspection Program, managing the inspection program at the terminal markets, providing audits and so forth. Previous to that, I've been an extension agent throughout the Eastern Caribbean, working in my background picture, produce farmers, all together. So I've joined the FDA Produce Safety Network with the assignment to the Southern region, including Florida and other states, to do exactly what Scott just said, to partner with, all, which is the State Department of Agriculture, with FOG and many industry organizations on events like this, education and outreach on the produce safety rule. And we are just here to support the implementation activities. Firstly, the understanding, so you could understand what needs to be done to implement the rules. So we are here as a resource, and we look forward to opportunities to engage on this platform and other opportunities as well. So without much ado, turn it back to you, Jesse, and we can get into the specifics.
Absolutely. Thank you, Trevor. So as I was just indicating, we at FOG have done 2 episodes on the on-farm readiness reviews, episodes 7 and 8, which is part of a series. And I welcome everyone to listen to our other episodes. But these particular episodes 7 and 8 are a discussion with inspectors of the on-farm readiness reviews program, and also with a farmer to understand their perspectives as it pertains to on-farm readiness reviews. So once again, for those of you who are listening to this webinar live, and also those that will be listening later, I welcome you or invite you to listen to those podcasts, because they provide an insight to the perspectives both from the inspector and the farmer. So with that, I think we want to sort of listen from Scott and Trevor and provide insight. One of the questions that we often get is, what is the history of the on-farm readiness review, and how has it maybe changed over time?
I'll jump right in, and then Trevor can add anything that he feels like to add. I actually was blessed to actually go on the very first pilot on-farm readiness review here in Florida. It was in South Florida, and it was as expected. It was informative, and it was just building a start. It was the foundation to build on what we have now. And my kudos to our University of Florida, UF-IFAS, extension for all the work that they did and done and presently do to make the on-farm readiness reviews and the training, what it is. But I was blessed to go on the first one, and actually there was several in between, and I was blessed to go on the very last pilot, which was in Michigan. Now, the history is, if I remember correctly, and don't quote me on these exact dates, but I believe the first one down in South Florida was in 2016-ish. And then the last one was several months later, maybe in 2017. And then that's when it was pretty much, finalized to what we have today. And how much has it changed over time? Since the first one to the last pilot, it did change quite a bit for the better. But since the implementation, it's pretty much been the status quo, and very little change. I do know that they are offering some training to educators and outreach for a second on-farm readiness review to just add to this one right here. It hasn't, the pilot for it is going to be in Michigan on the 13th and the 14th, I believe. And anyway, it's, in its infancy as far as, what's to expect of it, but it could potentially add some more, just add more to a little bit more to the present on-farm readiness review as we see it today.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Scott.
Yes, and just to add to context to what Scott said, so this tool, was developed, since the enactment of the Produce Safety Rule back in 2016, it became effective. So it's one of the tools that we use for education and outreach. We use the motto of educate before and while we regulate. So, on recognizing from the FDA perspective that the Produce Safety Rule regulation is new, and there would be, challenges to understanding and, what's in the regulation. So this is a tool, that working in close collaboration with NASDA, which is the National Association of States Department of Agriculture, and states and extension personnel that developed this tool and tweaked it over time to what Scott just said, give that history. It basically, is one of the best tools that a farmer can really use to assess their readiness for produce safety rule inspection, and also to better understand, the expectations of the farm, having those conversations. And as we go forward into today's discussion, we can get into more specific, but the rule really, remains as it is, as a guidance. A document is meant to be a standardized process, and just, tweaks here and there to make it better. But the overall objective in terms of what it meant to achieve has remained the same. And I'll always say, whenever I have opportunities, for farms that have not yet, reached out to the states to, have this on-farm readiness review on their farm, this will be an opportunity to really consider such an opportunity. And we'll get into more reasons as to why that may be the case.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, in episode 7 of our food safety podcast, we spoke to Kirby Kwam, who is a Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, FDACS. He is the Produce Safety Outreach Coordinator. And Kirby explained, also what the on-farm readiness review is, who manages and participates here in Florida, and what farmers can expect, during an on-farm readiness reviews. Some of the common issues that inspectors often see on farms was something that Kirby shared with us. And as both, Scott and Trevor have said, we're going to be getting into more in depth in today's webinar about those things. Episode 8, as I was also, mentioning a minute ago, we had the opportunity to speak to an actual producer, Daniel Miranda, who is the director of sales of Legacy Greens. That is a farm that produces microgreens. So Daniel completed 2 on-farm readiness reviews. Typically, most farmers, do one, but because in their particular case, their operation actually grew, and there were some additional things that pertain to that operation and food safety, they had a second. So it was very interesting. So once again, I encourage everyone to listen to both of those podcasts, because they do provide some really good information about, the perspective of both the inspectors and the farmers. So let's get now into some of the other questions that we have received when it comes to on-farm readiness reviews. So one of those questions that we get is, and I'll read it from our slide here, is, could you give some information on-farm readiness reviews and how they differ from state to state? So I guess some farmers who might be, not necessarily located in Florida, but maybe in Georgia and Alabama, and some of these webinars and podcasts do go out to some of those peoples. And Trevor mentions that he does serve the Southeast. Are there any differences between the on-farm readiness review programs in some states?
I can only speak for Florida, but we do have what we call, from each month we have a surrounding states call. And that call is basically to where the surrounding states, mainly the southeastern states, can get together and just discuss, bounce ideas and things off of each other that might help one state or another state from one state's perspective. But and Trevor may have more information regarding what he has seen from state to state. I do not know how they differ because, well, what I should say is, from what I understand, they're pretty much very similar from state to state, with the exception of who actually performs the review. Like, for instance, in Florida, FDACS personnel will team up with UF-IFAS, and those are the team members that will perform the on-farm readiness reviews. In other states, I believe it is also Extension that performs the reviews, but with the exception of, it may not be a state's Department of Agriculture employee. It may be someone from a different, from a governmental agency, or maybe someone that's been hired or appointed to perform those reviews for other states. So that's all I can really give. But I think the format of the review, I think, is as far as I know, is pretty standard with maybe a few minor differences.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So Scott, I think your last statement actually said it all right there. It is a standardized process. The on-farm readiness review was well vetted, well developed, and it's meant to be uniform. So, so there shouldn't be variation in, how this is being done, if it depending on the state or who performs it, right? It's meant to be standardized. There's a lot of training that goes in to make sure the reviewers, well up to speed on, performing these reviews. But I would just go through a little bit the process just to give you an example of when I say standardized. So there is a document, on-farm review document, that is being used, and that will be left as a resource to the farmer. You have to go through the review to get that document. And there's something we call a walk-around questionnaire. So what happens is that whoever performs the on-farm review, whether it's Scott or anyone from within the state of Florida or a different state and their state personnel, or sometimes FDA, and I will explain how FDA do these at times sometimes. We use a walk-around question, set questions on all the sections of the produce safety rule, because remember, all of the applicable requirements in the produce safety rule may not pertain to a given farm. So the walk-around question helps the reviewer and the farm determine which aspects of the produce safety rule they will do that walk around. I'm not going to say assessment or, the on-farm conversations, I will put it. So they will use that, and there is what we call a decision tree. So at the end of that walk around question, between the farmer and the reviewer, they'll say, all right, here are the different parts of the produce safety rule that pertains to your farm based on the information review here. And then it's meant to be a conversation. So it'd be the reviewer will do the walk around, observe, have conversation, engage in a two-way kind of, it's not yes or no, open-ended. It's for the farm to show, what's happening in the farm, and meaning the on-farm readiness review would be most useful to the farm when there is activity on the farm. So not when the season is over and there's nothing to show, because the idea is that the reviewer, will observe and assess practices as happening on the farm and refer back to the produce safety rule guidance and the documents and the manual, and show to the farmer how that observed practice and or condition ties into the rule. And in the end of that whole session, then the reviewer can provide a feedback to the farmer as to here are things that you're doing well in terms of they will meet the requirement of the rule, and so sort of further explain some of the regulatory language in the rule, so the farmer understands that. And also, most importantly, it gives the reviewer the opportunity to point out to the farmer, here are some of the key areas based on our observations, based on the discussions we had around these, where you could probably want to do some work on to address, practices or procedures or whatever SOPs, to come in compliance in the rule. So basically, if there were to be a produce safety rule inspection by Scott or any member of his team or any state that will eventually do the produce safety rule inspection, the farmer could be in a better state of preparedness, so to speak, right? So this is what it's all about. It's just show and tell, and I give you feedback in that case. I mentioned earlier about FDA at times will do these on-farm readiness review, and that is still the case. So ideally, states are in the cooperative agreement program, so you will work with your state's department, Scott and his team. They will provide the on-farm readiness review. There are some states where they're not part of the cooperative agreement, for example, and FDA will lead those reviews. That being said, even within states like Florida that conducts the on-farm readiness review through their program, we, FDA, PSN, always look for opportunities to partner with them. So again, it's voluntary. So we will look for opportunities to join with them. We not as the lead, but the state like Scott and his team will lead those, and we'll be there as part of the entire team, just for us to learn to understand the farming practices too, right? Because it's a two-way street where learning and sharing of information is concerned. So when you see a regulatory person like FDA on the farm with our state counterparts, smile.
Yeah.
Because you want to encourage those relationship building. It's nothing to be fearful of, because that's how we build relationships, and we message to you the same. And we say to the farmer, we are here as a resource working together. This is a demonstration of what we are saying. So we want to just make sure we dispel some of the myths and the fears. That's a natural, we understand that. So this is the opportunity that we are so thankful to FOG for, to be able to express those openly, to minimize any of those thoughts processes.
Right. And in fact, and you just leads to the next question, Trevor and Scott, because you just mentioned the myths that might exist. And so one of the questions that we often get about on-farm readiness reviews, and more than a question, is that there is a misconception, or maybe misconceptions, concerns about these on-farm readiness reviews. You mentioned that they're voluntary, just again as an example of something that people might say, that might think that these are mandatory, but this is voluntary, and also perhaps that the government or whoever, the departments of ag, are going to take all this information with them, and then now they're going to have information about someone's operation. Can you both maybe speak a little bit about what you think are some of those misconceptions or concerns, and perhaps put our farmers at ease when it comes to the type of information and what they can expect from the on-farm readiness reviews?
Yeah, I'll jump right in here, because I'm gonna make my answer to this question pretty short and concise, or I'll try to. And then Trevor can add anything he wants, because the reason I say that is because before we perform an on-farm readiness review for anyone that requests one, is we make sure that they are completely of the understanding that we are their guests, and that they are in control of everything regarding the on-farm readiness review, as far as when they want to start it, what they want to know, when they want to end it, whether they just want to let it end normally, naturally, or whether they want to stop it at a certain time. But they are in total control of the on-farm readiness review, and that we do not solicit to, all we do is just put it out there that we will perform this service for them if they will invite us to perform it for them. And I'll just leave it at that and let Trevor add whatever he wants to add.
Great.
Yes, Scott, thanks for that. And you're absolutely correct. And so as we said, if you listen to OFRR, on-farm readiness review, it is exactly what it says. It's an on-farm readiness review, helping the farmer to be prepared in the event of an inspection, helping the farmer to better understand the regulatory language. Now, one of the requirements we strongly encourage that the farmer would attend the PSA Produce Safety Rule Grower training first, because then the on-farm readiness review process will make more sense in terms of the terminology that use, the language, and the expectations. So, we would strongly encourage farms to make sure that you attend the Produce Safety Rule Grower training. But anyway, getting back to the midst of it, is that straight up, they are not inspections, okay? And it's voluntary. I mean, you can look up the meaning of voluntary. If the farmer decides, yes, we come. If the farmer decides no, then we don't show, right? So it's really our outreach to let the farmers know of a program, if a service that's out there to them free of cost. right? And because this is new, and of course, we understand the challenge of what really is that. Why are the regulators on my farm? Farm hasn't been regulated before. What really is this? And so we understand that there's going to be some imminent fear, but I think we have come a long way. And I'm going to give you some examples of some of those myths. I personally have done quite a bit of on-farm readiness reviews, and many of my FDA Produce Safety Network team members as well. And we all have interesting stories we can share, which are great experiences. In the initial onset, when we are on a farm, word spreads very quickly. Farmers is a very tight network, information share really, really quick. There is this heightened level of nervousness, and that's normal as we go through the process. I have gone for where I have had farms, although they entertain us on the farm. Yes, Trevor, FDA, you can do the on-farm review. I think I'm going to like this, but I'm nervous, and you ask another questions and, what if and things of that nature. When it was all said and done, we had a lot of requests that came in from those states and neighboring farms. Can you do or schedule an on-farm readiness review for my farm? Because they would have heard of that experience from that farm, right? So we understand the concerns, and don't be afraid to express your concerns, because only when you talk to us, then we can relate to you and provide you the facts from the fiction and provide that comfort, because this is really helping us, as I said before, to build those relationships. If we understand your needs and your concerns, then we can tailor training, for example, that specifically address those needs. Or if you have, understanding an issue where, okay, now I understand what this means, then you will spread that word to other farmers, because that's a positive experience. You have neighboring farmers who grow in the same product or who using similar practices. You can be, an inspiration to them to help them grasp the concept as well. So, that's the goal. And I think that has been happening more often as of late. So even that being said, we know folks are still, on the nervous end, but we are here to share on the platform that, we encourage farms to speak with your state extension folks in the state of Florida. Scott and his team, other states, reach out to your state Department of Agriculture extension personnel and learn more of the program if you need more, and see how you can really work with them to schedule such, because it's going to be in a great experience in the end.
Mm-hmm. And you both sort of, address this particular question by indicating that one, it's voluntary, that there is contact prior to the actual day of the on-farm readiness reviews, that, farmers in that particular time can ask all these questions, that the day that the inspectors arrive on the on-farm readiness reviews, they will do a tour or they will do a walk around, but they don't take any information with them at the end of the visit. And Scott and Trevor, I think both of you maybe alluded to it. It's free. So the opportunity to ask all these questions, try to improve, those areas of the farm that need improvement as it pertains to food safety, is really a great, opportunity for farmers.
If I may add quickly, if you don't mind, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah.
Yes, I want to emphasize, which I did mention, that records, I think I need to be clear that when we do on-farm readiness reviews, we do not do any written reports or take notes or anything, and it does not leave the farm. So two things happen here. We don't take pictures as well. We strongly encourage the farmer, to take notes, as much notes as you can, as we walk through the farm and have those conversations. Now, even though I said we generally don't take notes, there may be instances where the reviewer may jot down a few talking points, so essentially to the farm, it looked like, is he or she taking notes, right? Mm-hmm. If that were to be the case, at the end of the on-farmers review, the walkthrough, that packet, whatever document or paper that the reviewer wrote on, will be left with the farmer.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then the farmer now can use those notes and the discussion points as additional resource to help inform, their next steps, with on-farm activities and our packing house, whichever it may pertain to. So we come with resources and we leave empty-handed because we leave those resources with the farm. And that's standard across, FDA and all state. That's a standard procedure.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. And another question that we have received, and in fact, we've already sort of asked this question in the beginning, but perhaps, ask again for those people that had just joined. Are there any developments or changes that both of you might know about in the on-farm readiness reviews that farmers should know about? Or what maybe things that they can expect down the line?
Again, I'll let Trevor pretty much have the spotlight on this one, and I'll just chime in by saying, not that I'm aware of. Like I said, there is some education. There is a part, like a pilot that is in the process, and the first pilot will be in Michigan on the 13th and the 14th, and I think it's mainly for the outreach and education aspect of those that are performing the on-farm readiness reviews. But what that looks like is to be seen. But I'm not aware of any changes that or any developments that are really that I'm aware of. So I'll just leave it at that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Scott, I think you're correct as well. Not much more to add to that. Any changes, as if you call them quote unquote changes, will be, any strengthening of the program, but ultimately the end result is going to be the same. How the program designed, as we explained, and what the expected outcome and the impact we're looking to create on the farmer remains the same. And I would say the only thing we have to be cognizant of right now is that, we do follow the COVID protocols, whatever is in place in the state or the location or the farm or the, whatever, we abide by, whatever. But again, in terms of the on-farmers review, the program itself, it's just, anything strengthened and, it's just increasing the ability of folks to offer this within the states where training is concerned, but the expected outcomes are solid.
Okay. All right. Great. And so now we're basically, opening up the floor, and for those people that are right now, joining us, if they have any specific questions that they would like to ask our panelists, we invite you to write them in the chat. And we do have some questions that have been already asked, and let me go to that first question first. This first question is, can I have an on-farm readiness review even if I'm exempt or not covered?
The answer to that is yes. Yes, you can, because one thing that we realize is this on-farm readiness reviews are education and outreach oriented. And anyone that is exempt could possibly not be exempt at a later date. It also gives us a chance to actually verify your exempt status. Also not covered, that can change just depending on, what you grow from season to season or month to month. So yes, we do not exclude anyone. What I should say though is that, and I may address, this may be addressed later in another question, but I'll hit on it very briefly here, is that what we do is that we do prioritize those farms based on what Trevor was talking about earlier is regarding the Produce Safety Alliance grower training. We focus on, we make those a priority. and we also make those growers that are not exempt and that are covered by the produce safety rule. We do put those as a first, but we do not exclude anyone. So I'll just leave it at that.
Great, great.
Scott, I don't know if I can add anything to what you just said, but I would just, I don't want to say anything that conflicts that, right? But I completely agree with you. But I just want to emphasize that the on-farm readiness review, is really, it's a matter of prioritizing. The priority would be for farms that are covered by the produce safety rules. So in that way, it helps them to get ready in the event of a produce safety rule inspection, right? And again, assuming that that farm would have gone through the PSA Alliance grower training. So that being said, also it's based on resources within that state too, all right? Florida, for example, that is strong agriculture based, they will definitely look at, okay, how do we prioritize these? Is not a yes and no, but how do they fit within our prioritization? Do we have the personnel, the resources to be able to do farms that we know that are not covered by the produce safety rule when we know we have a list that are covered and need the on-farm readiness review. There are other states that may say, all right, we have a smaller growth database. The intent is for farms to move out of the exemption status to be covered by the rule, because that shows the farm is growing, right? It's, the productivity of the farm is increasing because, it's based on the monetary value threshold. So we want to see farms being exempted by the rule because that's a positive sign. So yes, again, work with your states, who conduct these and have those conversations. And I'm sure they'll be delighted by the outreach, that a farm is reaching out to say, hey, I would love to have on-farm readiness review, and then have those discussions. And then, between you and the farm and the state, we'll make those arrangements. But just that we like to echo that it's priority and resources.
Perfect. Good. We do have another question. Does the Trevor, I think you've already sort of alluded to this, but the question was, does the on-farm readiness review include a records review?
First, I'd like to say that, Trevor, I definitely don't want to be let you think that you're pulling up that you're second status because keep jumping in. But I just wanted to make sure that there's not much airtime that's wasted. So feel free to jump in at first if you ever feel the need to, Trevor. But anyway, I'll just say what Florida's policy is. It's not really a policy. I'm pretty sure this is everywhere. When we do an on-farm readiness review, does it include a records review? Let me say this matter-of-factly, that no, we do not request to review a farmer's records. However, if a farmer feels more comfortable with that we won't do we will not do a full review of his records or his or their records. However, but what we will do upon their request, we can, purview a few of their records to make sure that, if they're wanting to know, let's say, am I providing enough information for this record to be, like it should be? Am I using the correct form, or do you have any recommendations on how I should, document the record? Or et cetera, but it's only at the request of the one that is asking us to review them. But in the overall scheme of things, we do not go in to and we do not ask to review the records.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's correct. And we make those clear as well up front that here we explain, that in addition to not taking notes and taking it away with us or taking pictures, we're not requiring records review because it's not an inspection. And that's where it differentiates itself. But to go back to Scott's earlier point, which is getting off the thing here, Scott and I, we go back a very long way, with the relationship between FDA and the PSN. So Scott, you always know education outreach, you lead and FDA will always support, right? So you will always be in the driver's seat. So which means you're gonna have to go first. All
Okay,
right.
good deal. Okay, the next question is, will I get in regulatory trouble if you see any issues on my farm?
I can answer this question, but I tell you what, in the to be courteous, I'm gonna just relay this to Trevor and let him go first.
Okay, there you go, Trevor.
I think I spoke too soon. I give you too
Yeah.
much credit, Scott, but that's okay. So I wouldn't say regulatory trouble. That's something I won't say yes or no to. But so let's take out regulatory trouble for no. But what if I see issues on the farm? The expectation is that there is a potential for it's a farm and there is potential for observations by way of practices, conditions or situation in a farm or packing house that could lead to product being contaminated or give the appearance of that, which means then we get into, all right, can what is observed, pose serious adverse health consequences, from the consumption of this product, or exposure to, if what we observe is exposed to covered produce, right? So, we look at what's the imminent public health hazard here. Because remember, even in a voluntary setting as on-farm readiness review, protecting public health is always number one priority. So the good news is here, if a condition that's observed triggers that regulatory mindset, because you say, if I get in trouble because, okay, there's a trigger here, there are several things that would happen. And the first would be, okay, having conversations with the farm. If it can be, I'm just speaking very broadly here, I can get deeper into specifics, but just broadly, then you will have conversation with the farm. If it's something that the farm can address on site, then there is no regulatory action. So to answer the question, no regulatory trouble, right? If it's something that the farm cannot take immediate action on, then there are some procedures where we involve our respective ORA Department of Health, and we have protocols set up where we engage as appropriate. But even that being said, it's working together to making sure whatever is observed is either addressed, and then any opportunity or possibility of that product leaving the farm, and or as such, if it's deemed to be of a public health risk, that those controls are in place to prevent that from happening. So that said, we will work with the farm still together to address any emergent issues from those observations. And these are one of the things we also will explain with the farmer at the onset of the on-farmers review. In the event we see something, understand that we are still here to protect public health. And so but we will work together to address these concerns.
Right.
And I'll just chime in that when I read this question earlier, it was, I read it from the perspective of an on-farm readiness review and the word issues. And the only thing that I would say is, and I may be jumping ahead one question or two, but just like Trevor said, the regulatory trouble, if you see issues, it depends on what you call an issue. The only issue that, as Trevor was alluding to, that you would have regulatory trouble would be an egregious condition. An egregious condition is, pretty much defined as an imminent, immediate food safety risk to the general public that has already happened or has the likelihood of happening if something is not done immediately. So it all depends on, where you're at with regard to the egregious condition. So in answer to the question is, if it, in my opinion, the way that I would answer that specific question as it was asked is, unless it is an egregious condition, no, you would not get in regulatory trouble. We are there totally as an education and outreach component. and that's where we would leave it, unless, like I said, it's an egregious condition.
And that Scott, as you were just pointing out, is another of the questions that we had received. What is an egregious condition, perhaps, and what happens if there is one on the farm while the inspectors are there? So.
Well, if it's an on-farm race review, we see an egregious condition. Okay, first thing we do is analyze the condition. Is it such that you've already shipped produce? Is produce that was packed, held, whatever, grown already in the channels of trade that potentially could cause public harm? So we would look at that. Is there produce practices on the farm that this can be corrected while the reviewers are on the farm, that this can be corrected, and with the assurance that no public, that there's practically no chance of whatever that condition was, that it was addressed in such a manner that the public is not at risk, then we would not report that. But if an egregious condition is such that we deem that the public could potentially be harmed, we would have to report that to the FDA up our chain. Now, Trevor, I would like for him to chime in a little bit more on this, because I can only answer to Florida, and I won't get into the definitions of what means what, but Florida is a competition A and B state, meaning that we have an outreach and education component, and we also have the regulatory component. But our regulatory component is such that we work under credentialing by the FDA, which means that we pretty much work for them as contractors, just to use that term loosely. So we are at pretty much, so they guide us on what we have to do. If you are a competition C state, then that may have there may be a different aspect, but since competition C states still receive funds from the FDA, and that we still have to, abide by the produce safety rule, I still think that they have to be reported to the FDA. But I'll let Trevor shed more light on when, I'll let Trevor take it from here and shed more light on this question.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, thanks. I know we have very little time, but Scott, you sort of defined the egregious conditions really well. No difference to how I will pretty much give the overview. But let me give you some examples of when we say egregious condition, what that could mean. I mean, it could be variant, just to broaden your mindset. For example, we're looking at sources of contamination, that if an observation is made that, hey, this may pose an imminent food safety risk, for example. So we will classify it as an egregious condition. And for example, if you say contaminated water source used for overhead irrigation, as again, say some gray water in a corner of a field, so there's a big difference here. Overhead irrigation, you're talking about you applying that contaminated water on the entire harvestable or harvested portion of the crop, right? So that's more like that's the case of a widespread situation here, assuming that the water source is contaminated, right? Another typical example that you could consider whether or not it's egregious, which may fall into that category, is if you see animal fecal contamination, rampant across the field, and then there's active harvesting going on, and then you have machinery that's going through, or hand or whatever, doesn't matter, and there is that direct contact on the harvested produce, that's pretty straightforward, right? So those are things that we look at conditions. Other example, routes of contamination, people, people are typical in terms of sick person, for example, sick person handling, contaminated produce. They are in direct contact with the produce, right? You say you have crop harvested from the ground, except for produce like passion fruit that is allowed to drop first before you harvest it. But generally, when you harvest, let's say, peppers, tomatoes, whatever, and drops to the ground, and it may hit into fecal contaminated in the contamination, and then you pick that up and add it to your harvested crop, that may be a problem, right? So these are the kind of examples you want to think of as to what is meant by egregious conditions, and when you say imminent food safety risk and that public health hazard and stuff. These are the sort of examples. So I will stop here for now. I know we're 2 minutes to the hour to allow for any closing remarks or questions. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And in fact, we did have one last question through the chat. And that question is, a farmer says, I'm on a well. Do I need that water tested to use it to process vegetables for farmers markets?
Well, I'm only going to answer the question regarding to the produce safety rule. Can you address that question one more time?
Yeah, I can read the question again. The question is, I'm on a well. Do I need the water tested to use it to process vegetables that are going to farmers markets?
Okay, so the question seems it seems outside the produce safety rule, but I will answer the question as I would if they called me.
Yeah.
That is not a question that I can say, yes, you need to, or no, you do not need to. It's incumbent, it's actually illegal to sell contaminated produce. So, and it's egregious to knowingly sell contaminated produce. So that being said, it would be incumbent upon whoever's selling the produce to make sure that they are selling safe produce. Now, do they have to? That just off the cuff, that I would say probably not. But that also is contingent upon if they're at a farmer's market, does the farmer's markets themselves have any requirement prior to allowing someone to sell at the market? Because some of these markets are managed and they have a liability aspect that they're concerned about also. Mm-hmm. So that being said, the farmers markets themselves may have some sort of requirement, or depending on, I can't speak for other states, only Florida, but just, I'll just leave it that you ought to make sure that even though you may not be legally required to test your water, you should make sure that whatever you're selling is the safest product, that you can sell.
So just to echo what Scott said, even though the subpart E of the produce safety rule is currently under review, yes, we still encourage farms to, follow good agricultural practices, best practices. So in the event that they're using water for that purpose, I think it'll be good for the farm to know the quality of that water, by way of if testing is one of it or the source, right? And again, ties into what Scott just said, because at the end of the day, it is still the responsibility of the farm, regardless to where they're selling that, once that goes to consumer or even for their own personal consumption, that you want to produce the food safely. Remember, even though the water requirements apart, if the produce safety rule is still being finalized, food is still subject to the FDACS Act, the federal law. So which means food must not be adulterated or contaminated, to Scott's point. So we encourage good agriculture practices. If it means doing a water test to know the quality of your water based on the intended use of the water, I think that's an advantage to the operator, the farmer to right. know. But in terms of mandating, that's where, until the rule is finalized from an FDA perspective, we wouldn't go that far, but we will encourage, these best practices, in the meantime and at all times.
Great.
Yes.
Excellent.
And I'll just say one more thing to echo what Trevor just said. There's a saying out there, and y'all probably already heard it, and it's a great saying: know your water. And so that's all I'll leave you with is just I would recommend that you highly know your water.
Yeah. No, that's and that's good to keep in mind. And thank you for that, Scott and Trevor. I want to remind everyone who joined us today and who's listening to this webinar that you can find more resources and information on the FDA website. And so we have that link here in the slide, but you can always contact the FDA and their website for more information about all of the topics that we've discussed and the questions that we've been discussing today. Of course, here in Florida, the Southern Center and the University of Florida is also a great resource for information. You can contact your extension offices in your county. You can look at the trainings that they have available, provide technical assistance. So if you visit the UF-IFA Southern Center website, you can also, find information and resources there as it pertains to food safety. And as far as resources, I know that farmers can visit the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services website and find out about the on-farm readiness review on the website. Of course, all of us here at Florida Organic Growers wanted to continue to bring you useful information as it pertains to food safety and the food safety regulations. This particular webinar is part of our Food Safety for Farmers podcast and webinar series. So we encourage people to visit our website at www.foginfo.org, and you can, of course, send us questions to ask anything that pertains to food safety and some of the topics that we are discussing throughout this series. We really appreciate the time that Scott and Trevor have given us to answer all these questions, to talk to all of the farmers who participated in this webinar and who will be listening. And we really appreciate your time, gentlemen.
You're very welcome.
Same here. Thanks as well.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us today.